Hello everyone, my name is Bryn and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I used to make videos about my life and study at the Australian National University, but since moving overseas in 2022, I have shifted a little bit and now I'm making all kinds of lifestyle content about my life here in Europe as an Australian expat living in Spain. Now, as some of you may or may not know, I was living in the UK for about a year from August 2022 until June of this year, 2023. And while I was there, I didn't really make a whole lot of content for reasons mentioned in other vlogs. However, I wanted to share some things that I thought were really important for people who are moving to London or moving to the UK to sort of figure out before they go. I guess a bit of a living in London guide, if you will, for any Australians who are moving overseas, or really anyone from any other country moving overseas as well, but particularly from an Australian perspective. In this first episode, I'm going to be sharing all things accommodation, talking to you about the rental market, about buying if that's something that you're interested in doing, what your options are, how to go about it, all things renting, accommodation, living, staying in London. Now, I do have some level of experience to back this up. I did work in one of London's premier real estate agencies for a while in both sales and lettings. So I do have some background in that area of things. And also I did live in London. So I do have that kind of lived experience as well. And I lived there as someone who'd also lived in various other places in the world. So I have a bit of an understanding of other sort of rental markets and housing markets as well. So we are going to look at 10 different areas in this video. I have left timestamps below, so if you're interested in a particular thing about moving to London, check it out in the timestamps and hopefully it gives you some information about something that you're looking for. So I'm going to start with part number 1, and that's understanding London's neighbourhoods. So obviously when you're new to a place, you want to be moving somewhere that's safe, that has all of the amenities that you're interested in, and that maybe fits a certain vibe if that's what you're looking for, I guess. I think that as expats moving to London, particularly if we're doing like the gap year thing, it's very easy to have a vision of what you want in London, I suppose, based on movies or films or whatever. And maybe you just know there's really popular areas, there's really famous areas in films or in television, and sometimes they're not the best areas to live in. I guess it really depends on what you're looking for in accommodation. So this is going to be like a quick fire overview of all of the different areas in London and my opinions as an expat, and especially the places I lived. Obviously, all of these areas are going to be super different, and it's going to depend completely on what you're interested in, what you're used to as well. So this is just my opinion, more or less. So first of all, when I was living in London the first time, I lived in northwest London, around Primrose Hill and Swiss Cottage. Now, this area can be a beautiful area to live in. It's stunning. There are lots of really family sort of like streets, very cozy vibes. You've got close amenities like Primrose Hill, Belsize Park, Chalk Farm, Camden for bigger shopping centres and more touristy sort of things. You can also go into areas like West Hampstead, so further into northwest London. West Hampstead is now a really up and coming area. It's great for young people who are looking for somewhere with a really sort of village feel that still has great transport links. If you go further out west, you've got other areas like Golders Green, Harrow on the Hill. These areas are also very cheap these days. And they've got quite good transport links now into the city, depending on which line you work on. And also, as I said, they're a lot cheaper, and there's also a lot more cultural diversity in some of these areas. There's really big communities of immigrants. So if you are interested in trying lots of different cuisine, or, you know, for example, if you have Polish heritage, in lots of areas of Harrow, there is great Polish shops. So if you're missing something from home, that could be a great place to go and visit or to live. If we're looking further north, you've got places like Highbury and Islington, which is very popular now, and Angel as well. We had heaps of beautiful houses for sale there, and heaps of rentals going as well. If you go further north into areas like Finsbury or Walthamstow, you're starting to look at areas that are a little bit more leafy. I used to live in Finsbury. Personally, I didn't feel super unsafe in Finsbury, but I know that other people have had different experiences with that as well. So to each to their own. If we're looking up in North London, you've got areas like Tottenham or Walthamstow, sort of to the northeast, which you're starting to get into greener areas. As I said, there's a lot more lakes and rivers around there, but it depends what sort of area you're living in. Sometimes people find those areas not the safest. Again, it just depends on where you live. In London, it can vary street by street. So I think that while sometimes there's some truth in saying certain areas are more prone to certain things than other areas, if you're thinking about the area of London that has the most crime, it's central London. So I guess it's a bit of perception as well, more than anything else sometimes, I think. If we're moving down a little bit further, you can head east towards places like Stratford or Eastham or Barking, Stowe. These are sort of outside of London, but with the Elizabeth line, Stratford is a really good option. Quite quick to get into the centre now. Very, very popular area at the moment is around Dalston, Hackney, Clapton. These are historically quite poor areas of London, but obviously with gentrification, they've become insanely priced and very popular. Because they were historically poor areas, they do have that great community feel, very, sort of local shops, local markets. If you're looking for community, those places in East London can be great. And East London used to get a terrible rap, but I think that it's super artsy, super cool, a lot going on. Personally, I don't like areas like Spitalfields, for example, close to Columbia Road, or down into Shoreditch. For me, these areas just weren't all that they're cracked up to be, and I think there's heaps of other areas in London that have similar vibes that aren't as like popular, I suppose, that aren't as touristy, and you can still get a great place to live for a really great price. Moving further down into places like Whitechapel, St Catherine's Docks, Tower Bridge, down all the way down to Bermondsey, Camberwell. These were the areas of London that I worked in real estate, so this is the area of London that I suppose I know quite a lot about in terms of housing market. But these areas, it's a real mix, basically. Suburb by suburb, prices can vary by, £2,500 a month. And it just depends. There are some really cute warehouse style apartments around St Catherine's Dock, Wapping, and sort of on the edge of Bermondsey. If you're looking for something that's a bit more chill, Rotherhithe can be a great area. There's not so many shops and stuff around, but it's still very well connected with the Overground line. Also, if you're looking for something that doesn't feel like London at all, Greenwich and Deptford can be great places. I absolutely adore Greenwich. I would have lived there if I didn't live in Earlsfield, where I lived before. If we're moving further along the South Bank, obviously very expensive real estate. A lot of new builds as well coming in there around Elephant and Castle. Again, these are areas that are gentrifying, so we are destroying council houses and building very new, very expensive apartment buildings, which is another video into and of itself. But it means a lot of the vibes of the areas are changing, and they're becoming a lot more sort of brutalist industrial chic. So where there's very little life and almost clinical and hospital-like. So I think that that's definitely a great loss in some of those areas. If we're moving further west, obviously we've got central London where everyone knows and loves. We're talking areas like Westminster, Soho, St Paul's, I'm just trying to think, King's Cross, all the way across to places like Green Park. Very, very expensive real estate. It depends if you're wanting to live somewhere that's very London, but maybe quite loud, quite noisy, and possibly a little bit unsafe. Central London is very London. You're obviously very close to everything, in biking distance or walking distance to everything. If we're following the river down, we've got the south side of the river and the north side. The south side used to get a bit of a bad rap, but I lived on the south side. I love the south side. You'll find a lot of Aussies in Clapham, around places like Tooting. I lived in Earlsfield. There were heaps of Aussies and South Africans there. If you move further along, further down, you go to Wimbledon, but further across you've got Richmond. Richmond's lovely, but very far away from London. North of the river, closer to central London, you've got places like Chelsea, Kensington, Fulham, Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush. If we're talking about Chelsea, Fulham, Kensington, obviously these are very wealthy areas, historically very well-known areas. Shepherd's Bush is a bit more up and coming. A lot of Australians in Shepherd's Bush as well, but I felt that Shepherd's Bush was, I don't know how to describe it. It was just very consumerist in a way that it didn't have that sort of community feel. If you go even further out, you've got Ealing. Ealing has some lovely parks, but again, it's quite a long way to get to a lot of the amenities of London. And if we go back into the centre, we've got places like Notting Hill, Paddington, Maida Vale, all of this the tunnel connecting northwest London and central London. So Paddington, Maida Vale, Notting Hill, St John's Wood, all really beautiful, really expensive, but lovely little communities to live in as well. If I had to recommend some of my favourite neighbourhoods to people if they're moving to London, I would say where I lived around Earlsfield is a really great option. A bit cheaper than central London, very green, great connections to the city. Super safe area as well, and lots of expats around you if you're feeling like you're missing home. Places like Clapham can be a bit more expensive if you're looking in more central areas, but Earlsfield, Wimbledon are all very, very nice areas to live in and are a little bit less expensive than central London, and you have that greenery around you as well. If you're looking for something that's a bit more off the beaten path, a bit more artsy, I would go somewhere like Hackney or Dalston. Very unique areas to live in, a lot going on, lots of live music, lots of concerts, lots of places to eat out, just great vibes, great life overall. The downside is you have to catch the overground everywhere, or buses, because there's no underground. But depends, if you like the overground, that could be a good option. It's just usually a little bit slower than the underground. If you're looking for somewhere that has that really like old London feel, instead of going for somewhere like Chelsea, I would say choose somewhere like Maida Vale, where you've got this really nice community feel around a sort of central shopping street, and then you've got the beautiful old houses, and it is expensive, but it does have that really unique London feel without the price tag of somewhere like Kensington or Chelsea. I would say that that's also similar for places like Belsize Park, Belsize Gardens. You can get some of those streets, you can get great rentals for quite low prices, sort of near Swiss Cottage, but not actually on that main road. I think that those are good options for people who are looking for that real London vibe. Around Primrose Hill is also great, but it's very expensive again. I think that if you're looking for somewhere green, Earlsfield is definitely a great choice, as I said, or moving out even further east towards Greenwich or Deptford. Deptford is now quite a nice area to live in, Greenwich as well. I know lots of people who live in Deptford and love it now. There's heaps of bars in Deptford. Deptford is like the new Hackney, I think. And yeah, Greenwich is obviously stunning, but some areas can be quite expensive. But in other places, you're looking at flats that are much newer for the same price as an older flat in central London. Personally, I wouldn't move to central London because it's very expensive and you don't get much space. But if your dream is to live in the centre, or you want to be really close to your work, or you have the money to spend and you don't mind having less space, there are lots of great options in central London as well. But I would say, along with all of the beautiful things that come with living in central London, it can be a lot noisier, a lot dirtier. The buildings are typically a lot older, and as I said, a lot more expensive for the same standard of thing that you get somewhere else. Yeah, that would be my rundown of the best neighbourhoods to live in, that would be my choice to live in. Next up, we have a very short section on finances. I am going to be doing a dedicated video on budgeting. However, in this video, I would like to talk about some of the options for saving money if you're renting. Now, I know that London is a super expensive city to live in. Even if you're coming from places like Sydney with currently very high rental markets, London is just something else. London is like a beast of its own. It's absolutely insane, especially post-COVID. However, I think that there are a few important tips and important things to note about finances. So in terms of budget, the rental affordability calculator dictates that people should have 30 times the monthly rent as their salary. If you don't meet this rental affordability threshold, you should look for a UK-based guarantor. A guarantor should be someone who owns a property in the UK. They don't have to be a citizen, but it needs to be someone with a UK bank account, and typically someone who owns a property in the UK. In saying that, there's a lot of other affordable options for renting in London, or more affordable, I should say. Things such as finding flat shares or student accommodation if you're heading to university, or looking for areas where you know that the rental price is lower, are all great options. I think that if you are able to find somewhere with a private landlord, often the rent is also lower there, but those sort of tenancies are a bit hard to find and can be a bit hit and miss in London as well. I think that another option which we took, which wasn't necessarily cheaper long term, but was cheaper in the short term in some ways, was to live in a co-living. So that's where you are living in a building. I made a video on it previously, I'll link the video above, but basically you have a whole lot of amenities in the building, so you're not paying for extra things like the gym or even utilities. But again, the rent was very high for what we were getting, but we weren't paying for a gym in central London and things like that. We had co-working spaces, etc. So those are all things to consider. And I will be making a dedicated video on budgeting in London, and hopefully that will be able to provide you with some more information about general budgeting costs of food, transport, etc., rather than just housing budgeting. Number 3, navigating the rental market. So I would say that coming into the rental market can be very, very daunting, especially if you come from somewhere where the rental market is very different, like Australia. Websites that you can look for different accommodation options on include Rightmove and Zoopla for property searching websites, or directly with estate agencies. So going to a renowned estate agency, you can find them along every high street. You'll start to see the ones that are very popular, and giving your details, they'll be able to contact you with properties that come on that maybe match your criteria, because properties can go like that in London. If you're looking for a situation with flatmates, spare room has been a great solution for me. I found a lot of different flats on spare room. Yeah, local estate agents, or if you're looking for a private landlord, I would say open rent can be another good option as well. Next, the process. So this is all part of number 3, navigating the rental market, but the process of renting from start to finish. This is what it's going to look like in a very short form way. First of all, you're going to go to a viewing. You like the property, you make an offer. You'll be asked to fill in an offer form that has a lot of your details about salary, etc., etc. All of those will get sent to the landlord. The landlord will then choose the offer that they prefer. Maybe you'll do some negotiation, depends. Now, you're going to sign your contract and pay your deposit. Obviously, read the contract first, and you pay the deposit into a deposit scheme. Now, the deposit has to be held in a deposit scheme because that is the law in the UK, and that means that you'll be able to recoup your deposit at the end. Even if you have a disagreement with the landlord, you will be able to go through legal channels to potentially recoup that, depending on obviously if there's damages, etc. Next, you will move into the property. When you move into the property, there will be an inventory check. You should go through the inventory check yourself, take photos of everything. If you see any discrepancies, immediately notify your rental agency so that they know that there has been a discrepancy. You can collect keys obviously from the rental agency or from the inventory clerk, and then you move into the property. Now, if you have any problems, you're going to contact your rental agency or your private landlord, depending. And then when you move out, you'll often need to do a clean. The inventory clerk will come and do a second inventory, and then you will be able to get your deposit back. If you have any problems, there are lots of tenants' rights organisations in London. I'll leave some of them in the comments below in case you need any assistance with anything tenants' rights related. I don't have a lot of experience with that, so I'm not going to speak to that, but they have their links down below. I think Citizens Advice is a good one in the UK. Next, I think something that's important to consider when moving somewhere in London is the transport links. Has it got an overground? Has it got an underground? Has it got buses? Is it serviced by trains? How often are the trains? Is there any transport at all? All of those, I think, are fairly important questions to ask yourself when moving somewhere in London. A lot of that depends on you. Are you happy to take the underground every day? It can be very hot, can be very crowded, can be very dirty, but some people love it. Some people think that's the best way to go. Personally, I'm not a fan of the underground. I prefer overground trains, and not as in the overground, as in like railway trains. So when we were living in Earlsfield, that was a great option for us because there was a railway with real trains. I don't know I don't know what the difference is between the overground and overground trains. I'm not sure. However, you need to consider those sort of transport links. It can be really good to put it into Google. If you've seen somewhere on Rightmove, for example, that you're interested in, put it into Google, have a look at the route that it suggests, but also look at other possible routes, because if you cycle, for example, often Google doesn't tell you the best cycling route, but there are some other apps that can tell you great cycling routes. Considering those transport options is important. Also, it's important if you are living on a train line that you understand there's a lot of strikes at the moment. So it means that transport can be very unreliable, and often you have to take buses, and then that adds a lot of time to your journey. So it's just something to consider. And it's also something to make sure that you have an alternative method of transport, not just your original method of transport. So for example, when we lived in Harrow, it was next to impossible to find our way to work when there was a train strike or when there was a tube strike. When there was a tube and train strike, it was a disaster. I was 2.5 hours late to work because I was just standing there on a platform with every other person who was 2.5 hours late to work because there was one train for all of us. So that's definitely something to consider. Of course, I support everyone's right to strike, and I support everyone's right to a fair wage. But again, it's important to consider if you're moving somewhere and you know there's going to be transport disruptions. Think about it. Next, let's talk about cultural and legal considerations. So first of all, some difference I would say with renting in the UK versus Australia. In Australia, rental figures are provided per week. In the UK, they should always say the per month figure, not just per week. That's now, I think, a legal requirement to advertising for lettings in the UK. Secondly, it depends on the place whether it will be furnished or unfurnished. Most places are furnished. Sometimes you can come to an agreement with the landlord about furniture, depending on the landlord. But that sort of brings me on to the legal considerations point. If you have any disputes with your landlord, there are obviously proper legal channels to go through in the UK. And as I said before, Citizens Advice can be a very helpful resource for tenants in the UK. I will also put some other links below for how you can solve disputes with your landlord should you need to do that. Next, furniture and utilities. As I mentioned, many apartments in the UK come furnished, so it's not like countries like Germany where you have to set everything up yourself. That being said, obviously some places don't come furnished or don't come with all of the furniture that you might like, and if you're moving to the UK, maybe you need to know where to buy some furniture that's a bit more affordable. Good places that I've found for furniture, things like Dunelm, IKEA obviously, Wayfair is very popular. I know that H&M has a home section, Zara has a home section. There's also garden centre type places that sometimes have furniture. Like the B&Q, for example, I think has some types of furniture. I think that covers probably the big ones. I'm trying to think of any others. I can't think of any others off the top of my head. And in terms of other things, such as things like utility, water, electricity, Wi-Fi, gas, internet, water, etc. My best suggestion for people is to shop around on the internet. There's a lot of places like Compare the Market and things like that, where you can check the prices of different retailers, call them and ask, find the one that's going to work the best for you. In terms of things like council tax, make sure you pay your council tax, otherwise the council can sometimes evict you. You have to set up an account with your council for that, depending on what borough you live in. Do a bit of Googling. There's a lot of great resources on that as well. Number 7, we have local services and amenities. So things like deciding where to live can depend a lot on what amenities you need. Obviously, if you're a young family, you're going to need different amenities to a single person. But it's always a good idea to visit the area you're looking to move to and to look at things like supermarkets, healthcare facilities, whether there's dentists, doctors, physios, etc., depending on your needs. If there's parks and you really like nature, see if there's parks nearby. Looking at the walk from your house to the transport station, for example. All of those things that you might not necessarily think about, but can be really, really important to your quality of life. Also things like cafes. I know this sounds crazy, but as Australians, we're used to having good cafes, good coffee, good, cafe culture all the time. The UK is not like that. I'm sorry, it's just not. They think Starbucks is good coffee. I'm sorry, it's not. I think that if you're really into cafe culture and having that sort of local village feel around you, finding an area that has great independent cafes or just something around you is super important to maintaining your quality of life and keeping your weekends busy. So check out your local cafes, people. Also things like seeing if there is a community organisation, if you're Australian, seeing if there is an Australian community group, or if you're from somewhere else, seeing if there's that community group. If you're religious, finding your place to practice religion in that area, whatever your religion is. Finding out if they have different community forums or events that you're interested in. All of those things can contribute to how much you like an area or don't like an area. But I think that those things are something that you should look at more broadly before you sort of hone in on, oh yes, this is exactly the house I want to live in. So that leads me on to my next point, which is, well, what do I do in the interim when I've just moved to London? What do I do? Obviously, I would never recommend renting somewhere without seeing it in person first. This causes too many problems. Most genuine real estate agents won't rent your property unless you've seen it, because they know that can come back and bite them. It's a silly thing to do. So I would say rent an Airbnb for a month, or a hostel for a month, or I don't know, house sit for a month, but find some sort of short-term accommodation. Understand that that's going to cost money. That's okay. You're going to need to pay that money so that you can save money in the future by, one, having a genuine house, because I know people who've moved and then their accommodation hasn't been genuine because they haven't booked it properly. 2, making sure that you love the area you're living in, or that even if you don't love it 1,000%, that you're 3/4 happy with it. So you're mostly happy with the area you're living in, because even if you have an idea in your head of one area, maybe you get there and you're like, oh, this is really not what I thought it was going to be like. So I recommend going visiting all of the areas first. We have cultural integration. Moving country as an expat is always difficult. Obviously, it's a little bit different for me as an Australian, because British culture and Australian culture, although nowhere near the same, can be somewhat similar. We're all speaking the same language, there are things that we can connect on, that, we've had joint childhoods in some ways. However, if you're coming from a different country, finding an area that has a lot of your people from your community living there, or a lot of events that sort of speak to your community, can be a really good thing to make you feel less homesick, make you feel a little bit more at home, and also can be a really good way to make friends, because it can be very difficult moving to a new place and trying to make friends. Finally, if you would like me to make a video on future planning and house buying in the UK, because I worked with a lot of the buyer side of the housing market in London, let me know. I'll make a full video on it. But the very brief summary I'll give here is that you can buy a house in the UK even if you're not a citizen. Sometimes you can get a home loan even if you're not a citizen. There are a lot of things to consider when making a big purchase such as a house, but making sure that you can prove where you got the funds is obviously a big thing as well. But yeah, let me know if you'd like me to make a video on future proofing you're living in London or you're living in the UK in general, because a lot of it can be very similar. Anyway, that is all I have to say for this video. I've talked for so long. This video is going to be so long, I know. If there's any other questions you have about living in London, the accommodation, etc., leave them down below. Or if you have any questions about budgeting, about what my experience was like, finding a job, why you should live in a co-living, why you shouldn't live in a co-living, I don't know, why I wish I didn't move to London, any of these things, ask me down in the comments and I will get back to you, or I will make a video on it. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful and good luck with your move to London.